Hannah? Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And hello again, also for the people on the streaming. Nice to see you all here. I'm Mateja Kurir, manager of the platform, alongside with, of course, Matevž Čelik, the head of the platform. And welcome back to the LINA Platform Conference, Architecture and the Future of the Planet. I hope you all enjoyed your break and have time to make new connections and new collaborations. We will continue with this second part of our conference. Now we have 2 lectures and then a discussion. So first, the first lecture is titled The Great Repair. And our speakers are going to be Dr. Florian Hertweck, Milica Topalović, and Markus Krieger. And I'll just first like to introduce them quickly and then invite them to the podium. Okay, so Dr. Florian Hertweck is an architect and professor at the University of Luxembourg. His research and planning activities include design strategy for metropolitan regions, and now the list is going to be long. Berlin, Paris, Shanghai, Casablanca, Istanbul, Geneva, and the greater region. Milica Topalović is Associate Professor of Architecture and Territorial Planning at the Department of Architecture ETH Zurich. Her work is concentrated with territories beyond the city and transformation process that are exposed to movement of capital, social restructuring, and environmental change. Markus Krieger is editor of Arch Plus and co-curator of the exhibition and publication project of The Great Repair. So please, Markus, Florian, Milica, take the podium. And welcome to the LINA Conference.
Thank you, Mateja, for those kind words. Okay, so my name is Markus Krieger. I'm editor at Arch Plus, and we're very happy to present this exhibition and publication project, The Great Repair, collaboration of Arch Plus with ETH and Uni Luxembourg. Of course, there's a whole team at Arch Plus working on this project. That would be Alexandra Nemo, Christian Heller, Felix Hoffmann, Sarah Knechtel, Marlene Husto, Anne Leno, our editor-in-chief. At ETH, Nazli Tümerdem is working on the project, and at Uni Luxembourg, Maria Maric. All right, to begin, Broken World. The project focuses on strategies for repairing a broken world that aims to reduce exploitation, care for what exists, repair what is damaged, and conserve resources. In other words, The Great Repair is about the art of living on a damaged planet. The Great Repair project uses key values to represent approaches that make repair tangible as a design paradigm for a new material culture. It links architectural with artistic and spatial practices and presents projects and works that question market and growth-based narratives of the ecological crisis.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I have to interrupt on that. So the large scale, why is the Great Repair great? And we propose that it ties to the planetary scale of social relations, the planetary scale of crisis that needs to be tackled. The awareness of this planetary dimension is relatively recent. It goes back perhaps to the 60s and the 70s. For instance, the crisis of the city captured in 1968 and the birth of environmental movement. And in the late 90s and 2000, there is more discussion, and the notion of repair comes forward, for instance, in the work of Stephen J. Jackson, theorist of technology, who basically talks about the effects of economic globalization, international labor division, and the kind of sudden awareness in social sciences and humanities of the planetary factory, let's say, and the side effects of urban consumption, the mounting waste, and the kind of the fact that, you know, the whole number of this kind of side effects of these processes has been externalized to distant geographies at a high human and environmental cost. And Jackson says, in this broken world model, we now take erosion, breakdown, and decay rather than novelty, growth, and progress as starting points in our thinking. So the point here is that these planetary processes are also reflected at the local level, so and also appear throughout the different scales of the urban and the social. So we somehow simultaneously we are forced to think through all these different scales and levels. And then the point that we would like to make is also that we have to make a difference between repairing and fixing. And this relates to the notion of the spatial fix proposed by geographer David Harvey and others, who talk about this kind of relentless rearrangement, let's say, of capitalist geographies of extraction, which open continuously new frontiers, new resource pools, and so on, through techno-fixes, as they're called, and other fixes. So in other words, fix is every action designed to keep the broken system running. These are images of destruction in the area of New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina. And then it's also important to highlight at this planetary dimension the notion of reparations, because we argue, and also in the footsteps of many other researchers, that climate crisis and injustices of colonialism are intertwined, that we are aware that the effects of climate crisis will be unevenly distributed and exacerbated along the north-south already existing asymmetries. So this highlights the kind of question of how do we deal basically with those planetary asymmetries, and what is the role of, let's say, colonial and climate reparations. So the illustrations you're seeing from the work by Olufemi Taiwo, Considering Reparations, a recent publication.
One of the main references for our exhibition and publication project is a very groundbreaking text by Wilfried Lipp, who was a Landeskonservator, conservationist in Austria, and he published in 1993 an incredibly important text where he pleads for what he calls a Reparaturgesellschaft, so a society of repair. And in this, so facing resource scarcity and climate change, he says we should extend the principles of heritage protection to the whole built and unbuilt environment, but at the same time we have to change the principles or the idea of heritage protection itself, and as it has to allow for more, let's say, regenerative and also transformative approaches. So we really invite you to read this text. So for the project of the Great Repair, we defined 6 values: sufficiency, longevity, solidarity, reappropriation, plurality, and care, which we would like to develop now more in detail. The first value is sufficiency. sobriété in French or Suffizienz in German, which has been developed for the energy transition, complementary to consistency, you know, circular economy and renewable energies, and of course efficiency, which is rather in the spectre of the techno-fixers. It means doing more with less. With less energy, you know, in the energy discourse, they say the best energy is the one that is not used. So as less energy, less resources, of course for us more, maybe even more important, less land consumption, and work, of course, intensively with what is there. So sufficiency doesn't exclusively mean to change people's lifestyles, also, maybe also by our projects, but it rather focuses on a new planning paradigm. This is, I think, extremely important, and this is, of course, enrooted in the architectonic, deeply enrooted in the architectonic culture, as you see here, with Marc-Antoine Logier's primitive hut, and the notion, a very important notion in the history of architecture, of economy of means. But also an important reference for sufficiency lies in the urban repair cultures of the 60s, 70s, Bologna, Berlin, and many other cities. And we love, of course, and this is another very important reference for us, the neologism of Instandsbesetzung, meaning people who resisted to the urban renovation. You know that renovation at this time meant demolish and reconstruct, and they resisted to this kind of urban, destructive urban renovation by squatting the old existing urban structures and at the same time repairing them. So it's, of course, a highly social and political project, and complementary to this top-down planning or new planning culture. It means also enhancing this kind of bottom-up cultures. For sure, Lacaton Vassal are very important protagonists of the Great Repair, as they are always very careful with what is there. Never removing substantially things, but rather adding something. And by adding something, you also repair what is there. And this underlines, of course, again, the regenerative and transformative character of repair. So it doesn't only mean to fix things or to re-establish a previous state. So we now believe that kind of a moratorium on demolition is very, very urgent. So maybe to go a step beyond and say that we should orientate the whole production of space towards what is there. It's a kind of a new culture of the as found somehow. And this moratorium also emphasizes the legislative aspect of great repair facing the resource scarcity. So the next value is longevity, or durability, if you want so. So in contrast to recycling, and this is important because recycling is rather in the spectre of consistency, which remains entrenched in the capitalist logic of high material consumption, longevity considers the lifespan and life cycles of materials, objects, and techniques as crucial factors in waste prevention. So look at this beautiful calendar by Enzo Mari that you can use every year. You know, you don't even, if the calendar that you buy is in, I don't know, paper or recyclable, but you still have to throw it after a year, and then we all need that. Recycling needs also a lot of energy. So this is a good example of an alternative approach to design, which is not made for fast consumption, but to last. And here we can also refer to the book, I don't know, it's a brilliant book of Marvin Trachtenberg, Building in Time. So kind of a new architectural culture of building in time and not against time or outside time, but in time or with time. So which also, of course, questions the idea of the very modern idea of a strong authorship and of the finished object. So we have to understand, first of all, this quote by Pierre Kerr that we interviewed for the Arch Plus issue, super interesting interview where he said, because without permanence, there's no sustainable development, because he tries to reconfigure somehow the notion of sustainable development that many researchers want to get rid of. And that means that we have also to change the productive system. And we have to understand that in order to last, that things that are there needs constant care, maintenance, and repair. And the Morandi Bridge was, of course, developed in a totally other spirit. They thought it would never need such a maintenance, and we all know the results.
Okay, next value is solidarity. Of course, repair can always be a social activity that promotes collaborative processes and ways of organizing. And it's important to realize that in the face of catastrophes, it's really solidarity we need to build a kind of a climate resistance, but even more so climate safety for communities exposed to the dangers of it. And for designers and practitioners of architecture more generally, solidarity, first of all, also means acknowledging that the struggles for repair have been done and are being done by the communities which are suffering the damages for years and years, even centuries. And to be a designer in solidarity with these groups means not simply gesturing, but also taking a risk, investing in those practices and working with them. And as Oksana Timofeeva here says, also in the interview from the Arch Plus issue, we need to take back the metaphor of rootedness or roots in solidarity from the conservatives, as it can have a kind of revolutionary potential or a way of countering forms of dominance in the climate regimes that exist today. The next value is reappropriation. Of course, colonial violence, as we've seen in the introduction, is at the base of the climate crisis today, as it is a prerequisite of producing cheap nature. Exploitation is a key word here. And it's important, if you want to have a critical climate discourse, that this dimension is addressed. And practice of decolonial repair must consider the reappropriation of what has been misappropriated and devalued. And this can range from objects like here, the French coin turned into Berber jewelry, to architectures that have, especially in the modernist eras, operated in colonial frameworks, even if in this case, the Candelis Josic Woods projects in Casablanca. And of course, one here also needs to acknowledge that these processes of repair can be democratic ones and ones of bringing people together. And finally, there is also a dimension to land in this that kind of transcends the global north and south divide in the financialization of territory. And one way of reappropriating that is necessary during the time of climate crisis is addressing these questions of financialization of land across the globe.
Thank you. So the idea of plurality or the value of plurality in the context of great repair concerns the modes of production and exchange of knowledge. And we argue here that there is, of course, a history of one-sided technoscientific rationality that has worked against this plurality. This includes practices based on indigenous, artisanal, and bricoleur knowledge that use available resources to solve problems, change expert position, and change the constellation of actors. So in the sort of, let's say, current system of knowledge production that we are questioning, there is, it is clear that entire geographies and communities have been marginalized, let's say, with their knowledge and approaches. And it is crucial to, let's say, recapture their experiences and to somehow create possibilities, for instance, for representation of indigenous communities through, let's say, different institutions, whether it be planning or academia and so on. So one project I can mention is Indigenous Biocultural University in the Andean Amazon, where our students, our doctoral students at ETH are participating with Inga community and the artist Ursula Beeman and so on. So essentially the representations of various knowledges around the world, various knowledge systems are at stake, and the ways of aligning them with let's say the Western knowledge systems. And I think what is particularly important, of course, is that we seek to pluralize the conversation around climate crisis in particular, for instance, through the kind of indigenous knowledge, also the discussion of the rights of nature and so on. So in the forums of global governance, through the legal tools and so on. And finally, we have foregrounded this conversation around care. It is a huge and rich discourse. It's a discourse of the feminist theory of the various generations of it, and here we say that in a care perspective, repair involves not only repairing things but also caring for people, non-humans, ecosystems. And it stipulates that the previously invisible work is recognized. This includes the externalized costs of domestic and reproductive labor as well as labor of nature. So, in other words, Moore and Patel, Jason Moore and Raj Patel used the words we have to let's say make sure that contributions of the what they call femitariat and the biotariat are recognized and cared for. And also what is important here is that the care perspective does not, let's say, cover merely the let's say, domestic sphere, but extends. It has a environmental dimension, and it can perhaps help further the conversation on the biodiversity loss. So, for instance, can we change approaches? Can we reframe the idea of labor in industrial, agricultural, food production systems which are depleting to the soil and biodiversity? We know today, for example, that diversity requires work. It requires a much higher proportion of human participation and requires a very different sort of social relations in relation to the land and territory. So in that sense, we think that these sort of different set of socio-ecological and economic relations that are perhaps becoming foregrounded through this care paradigm, such as commoning, would in fact work in a kind of a reciprocal way, right? So by caring for the land and nature, we also have a sort of reciprocal effect of caring for the human community. We can now move to the practices of repair.
How much time do we have left? 5 minutes, great. So based on these values, so we can speed up a little bit, but go through what we call the practices of repair, and this is now a work in progress, and so not to be meant exhaustive, but we are happy for every interesting hint and project. So repairing by doing nothing is, you all might know, the Place Léon Lecoq, which is a good example for preferring sometimes not to act or not to act by adding a new object, and of course not by demolishing, but and Lacaton Vassal thought that this place needs most of all care and maintenance. And then it's also about repairing the whole modernist and industrial legacy, the moderne Siedlungen, the modern housing complexes, and here again the great repair differs from a kind of a conservative understanding of repair, as it is of course not about reconstructing an ideal of, let's say, something that one could call the European city. And in this respect, Lacaton Vassal are, of course, again, valuable, not demolishing the object, but adding maybe a layer that also regenerates and transforms what is there. Then I think we can discuss this later on, but I see a kind of an incertitude amongst this younger generation, which differs maybe from the certitude of my generation. We always wanted to design new objects and to build, and most of you maybe don't want to build even anymore. So this is somehow this new approach to the built environment, maybe not to, and especially here as an activist, to struggle against with the demolition of the so-called Ersatzneubauten in Zurich, and to say we should maybe define and find other strategies of dealing with what is there. And then it is, of course, also about reterritorialization and relocalization, and
Yes, and another aspect is, of course, concrete and the myth of its permanence. We have a contribution by Sarah Nichols on Betonkosmetik. This is a word that exists in German that literally means concrete cosmetics. It's the act of repairing or supposedly repairing the surface of concrete to make it not look vulnerable or immutable, unchanging, which is, of course, part of the big narrative with concrete that permeates in its ubiquity all infrastructures and buildings to such an extent that half of the anthropogenic mass, planetary-wise, is made up from concrete structures. Then there is repair as a way of life. A new generation of Japanese architects challenging the paradigm of creative destruction, replacing buildings every 25 years, and rather working with what is there, finding a house and through cutting and reusing materials gradually over time, making it into their own. Additionally, we also acknowledge that repair also, of course, exists as an act from necessity, and as well is can be an act of a social gathering, a social act, a moment of social identification, as here with the great mosque in Janneh, which was photographed by Bas Prinsen, which, of course, that reading is too simple because colonial dimensions permeate that project, which can be seen in works of Kader Attia, which we already had in the opening. And in more concrete architectural terms, this means addressing reparations in the colonial city. Here, Cave Bureau with a proposal for a Maasai cow corridor of how to repair the colonial infrastructures that permeate them with their whole legal but also material structures. Yeah.
We would also like to foreground in the exhibition the repair in the context of post-catastrophe situation, let's say, or climate catastrophes. One example is the work of Atelier Bau after the tsunami. And the question is how to repair the territory in which there is a physical destruction, but also the social fabric has been destroyed. Do we empower the communities to take back their land and livelihood, or do we do it differently? I think it's a crucial question. And then, of course, there is also a question how to actually build resilience in advance so that such events don't happen. Also, the question of memory and can we repair the ways in which we remember. One example is Babin Yar Memorial Complex in Kiev with the synagogue built just completed before the breakout of the war in Ukraine in Kiev. But also related to that, the work of Maxim Rokmaniko from the Center of Spatial Technologies, who undertook a project of forensic reconstruction of events of genocide in Babin Yar. We are also, what we also want to do in the exhibition is somehow acknowledge that there are dimensions and moments that are irreparable and that this needs to be accounted for. One example is the Assisi, the famous Giotto's frescoes that have been damaged in the 1997 earthquake and further damaged through climate, also through even human conservation intervention and so on. So in a way, these are the pieces that have been left after the fresco was reconstructed, so it was sort of not possible. So in a way, repair is not a sort of 100% return to a previous state, and it's also impossible to maintain such states. So there is not such thing as a kind of a frozen object, but let's say a simply and kind of ongoing life and change. And we are also interested in these dimensions of other dimensions, let's say, of repairing territory. So for instance, what does it mean to inscribe commons as a new form of property, or new but also old form of property ownership within the current cadastre and give it a legal definition? This is explored in a fascinating way in the work of Marva Asanios, artist in a Kurdish female movement in Turkey, and also in a fascinating way, for instance, the work of Marjetica Potrč, which highlights these relations between Soča River and the Lachlan River in terms of protecting the rights of rivers also legally.
Thank you. Okay, we're almost there. And then at the end, last but not least, we have to repair ourselves. You know, repairing the way we teach, we do research, our our profession, and the curriculum of teaching and so on and so forth, repairing the very notion of authorship, and so the curriculum, the hierarchies. You understood that it's a feminist project. I'm glad that I could say it. And then repairing the office, I mean, you all remember the nights we spent for not so important and maybe even important offices that are maybe even not there anymore. And this is really, I think, almost the last slide. So this is where the exhibition will take place in the Academy of Arts in Berlin. And it's interesting because it's also a beautiful modern building, which has been, of course, substantially renovated or restored, let's say. And there is Wilfried Brenne. He's one of the most important German architects for in this restoration of modern buildings, and he has this amazing archive of the material samples, and we will somehow deal with this and show somehow this archive, and it's also about a kind of that this repair needs a new kind of archive and documentation. You want to say a last word on the last slide, right?
Yes, so we want to say thank you with this image by William Morris that was painted by Jeremy Deller in 2013 at Venice Biennale. So, you know, William Morris came back to Venice in 2013 and he was angry with some things that he saw. And I think this is a kind of good commentary on the kind of culture of dialogue. Maybe there is a little bit too much political correctness. Maybe there are things that we can say a little bit more directly, and remember those important histories that can help us. So thank you very much. I mean, I just want to say, so the exhibition is in around 1 year from now, so it opens mid-October in Berlin, and we still have let's say, a road ahead of us, and would be delighted to exchange with you afterwards around these ideas. Thank you.
Stay with me, Florian. Stay here, please. Thank you very much. We will take a quick question anyway. Very interesting project. Thank you very much for your presentation. Is there a quick question in the public? Yes, there is a hand over there. No, we need to have a microphone for the streaming.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the lecture. But I have a quick question. Maybe it's too direct, but I'll make it simple. We are listening a lot about this discourse of care and reparation and everything, but mainly it's coming, and it's a made discourse by the centers of power and by the centers that are like making this colonialization of knowledge and practices and everything. Zurich is one of them actually also. So I'm interested on your stance on this, and can margin produce such like shift in a discourse also?
I think it's about opening the conversation, right? So this is, let's say, in this exhibition, we are also trying. So for instance, we pointed this kind of bridging even the knowledge systems, right? So let's say, how do we actually break this center-periphery gap, right? How do we start by sort of consolidating or aligning our politics and efforts, right? It's quite hard. We've had artists that we invited to the show, and the conversation is very tough, I have to say, you know, are you guys genuine? Are you just going to appropriate our work and our knowledge for your promotion? You know, it's going to be commodified and so on, right? It is genuine, right? I don't think we have really a choice, right? So I would argue it in that way, no? It is genuine, and I think it's not just the intention. I mean, there is, so let's say we have initiated projects that are, you know, that have this idea of reciprocity, and we are, you know, trying to work with people and to do it at equal terms, right? And I think it involves a certain learning about how to actually do that, you know, relearning maybe. I see that Marietica is there. So. Hi. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry we don't have time. At this, there is. I wanted to propose to have a discussion later on when we will move to the roundtable and discussion, if that's okay, to move now with the program. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Markus. Thank you, Milica, again, for your great presentation. And good luck with the project. Okay, so it would be nice also to share with you this, how this collaboration between LINA and this presentation came through. So we invited Milica Topalović to give the lecture, which is she's going to present it now, the state of the architecture, and she explained that she's collaborating with Florian, with Markus, with this project. So we thought it would be a great idea to present it also to the public, because now we are moving forward to the lecture with the topic, so the state of the architecture. So the state of the architecture is a reflection of a prominent expert on projects that were submitted to the first LINA Call for projects. The state of the architecture is a commentary on the current situation of the profession and a reference to the emerging talents. So LINA, the European Architecture Platform, connects established players in the field of architecture with LINA fellows, emerging thinkers and practitioners with concrete proposal for how architecture has to evolve to fit a regenerative and equitable future for all. And LINA choose those emerging thinkers and practitioners from the application at our annual call for projects. And LINA has received more than 200 applications to this year's LINA Call, which was open from July to early September. And we have some of the fellows who applied also here with us. And tomorrow we will hear 25 featured LINA fellows who will present their projects to the members and also, of course, to the public. And you are all invited to join us tomorrow as well. But before that, we will hear now the interpretation of those applications prepared by Milica Topalović. So Milica, please. Yes. Which one is yours? Lina? Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. So I will thank you, Mateja, thank you, Matevž, thank you, Hanna Zirman, and everybody at LINA for the invitation and the opportunity. It is really great to be here in Ljubljana. I have to say that, and I would like to, in fact, present a very brief talk building on the previous outlines. So let's say if we take somehow this perspective of repair, what do we see? And I also I am attracted by the setup, which I haven't known before, let's say, and it was exciting to find out about LINA, focusing on emerging talent, young thinkers and practitioners who bring proposals for equitable and regenerative architecture, impressive network of collaborators, and addressing the disciplines. So, in a way, LINA is a specific body or agency which already, in a way, works along those lines. And also, I was interested as a pedagogue. I also work with young architects and students, and in a way, I'm constantly confronted with that reflection. What is our pedagogical effort? How should we design a curriculum, let's say, in a changing world, or curriculum, you know, in the condition of unequal world and climate crisis and so on? How do we empower young people, let's say, to enter their practice, and what should be the contours of those practices? So, in these few thoughts, I will share. Essentially, I'm also speaking from that perspective, let's say, as an architectural pedagogue. And I wanted to start by this idea that planetary crisis is, in a sense, and we are discussing that, it's a crisis of architectural tools, it's a crisis of you know, academic sphere as well. We are redesigning the curriculum at ETH constantly for the past number of years. And I would like to also point out that this is a relatively novel situation. If we look back maybe 20 years, and that until very recently we never spoke about the crisis of, let's say, disciplinary tools. We essentially spoke about crisis of urbanism, which I think is a good conjuncture to make. So, let's say, epistemological and kind of political limits of urbanism, urban design practice that were exposed in the second part of the 20th century. So that was a kind of part of our discipline which was engulfed in crisis. And we know that urban design, urban planning, especially in this country, where I was also part of the former Yugoslavia, was crucial to architectural professional repertoire in the earlier part of the 20th century. And then later, these influences have been diminishing. So very few architects of younger generations in Europe, myself included, have had a chance to deal with kind of urbanistic tasks of the notable scale and complexity that were characteristic of the previous decades. And considerable part of that professional experience has been marked for my generation by the sense of kind of withdrawal of urbanism from architectural theory and practice, a widespread sense that there is a crisis. And this sentiment was summarized in the text I've illustrated here. Rem Koolhaas in '95, Whatever Happened to Urbanism? And he asks how to explain the paradox that urbanism as a profession has disappeared at the moment when urbanization everywhere, after decades of constant acceleration, is on its way to establishing a definitive global triumph over the urban condition. And so in this context of our conversation today, this crisis has shaped also the pedagogy. It has shaped how we teach, and I can speak for ETH in that sense. It meant a focus on the kind of built object, privileging the built object, and the other aspects of design that are more relational, whether social, socio-technical, environmental, were not in the foreground. There were also conversations in the 90s, you know, the architecture autonomy, the kind of impasse with complexity, and so on. And of course, at the same time, also the kind of a political, or we could say ideological dimension, the architecture as a, or the object as a manifestation of a more liberal agendas, market-oriented agendas, no? So, so it is interesting, and what I see also in LINA, I mean in the LINA as an effort, I think, but also in the works of that have been submitted, I see the kind of change of tide, right? We are trying to recapture the urban, right? And we are trying to recapture the public role of the architect, no? And I think that this is a general effort. I see it also in my students, and it is kind of without exception that particular kind of object-based understanding of architecture is just not there anymore, and it was there until very recently, let's say. Then the other problem is, let's say, if we are now in the urban, let's say, the problem is that urban has not been a static field, you know, since we last looked at it, let's say, in the 60s or 70s or so. Urbanization processes have, you know, escalated. They have become planetary, and by returning to the urban, we have sort of novel questions that have to do with conceptualizing the field, reconceptualizing. Like, what are we really looking at? And this is an illustration of a work of ETH Studio Basel, presented in 2005 in their study Switzerland and Urban Portrait, which I want to bring as an illustration of the works of architects trying to conceptually reframe the field of the urban. And basically, they are asking that question: what is urban and what is urbanization in 21st century? How does it operate, let's say, across the territory? And what are consequently the kind of implications for the works of architects and urbanists? And what they did in that book that you might know is they presented a highly provocative thesis of Switzerland being a completely urbanized country, as they said, and very provocative in Switzerland, a country that really prides itself for being a pastoral and alpine country. And there is a text, for example, by Marcel Miley, who says, is Matterhorn urban? And he has the argument, yes, Matterhorn is urban. And so in a way, the whole study is geared toward that, to say that villages and the Midland and the Alps are part of the fabric of urbanization, that we are equally sort of participating in the kind of urban modes of living and production of space in all these territories, that there is no nature or rural anymore in any kind of traditional sense of these words, right? And that means that city cannot be any longer the kind of exclusive site of the urban design, right? Or the reflection on the urban, right? So these are kind of tremendous implications. So we, in fact, talk about the kind of globalization or planetarization of the urban, right? And that has implications for the way that we design. So urbanism has become territorial. Urbanization is a planetary condition. Rural-urban binary has collapsed. And we need a different kind of epistemological base as designers, a different kind of conceptual tools. And I would say that these are the kind of questions I encounter in my pedagogy, but when I see the works in LINA, I recognize that effort, no? There are works that are going beyond, let's say, the site of you know, concentrated, built-up areas, and you know, they are trying to explore what is what is out there. And I think that a kind of effort where we try to articulate really how we as disciplines sort of operate beyond the city is very important. So let's say I have tried to distill a few elements for experimental and critical pedagogies that I discuss with my students and that I would also like to share with LINA's fellows. So in this field, how can we operate? And the first I would like to propose, and it ties to what we spoke about in the previous talk on repair, is the aspect of critical inter and transdisciplinarity and also epistemic plurality. So we do not need any more disciplinary practices. We need inter and transdisciplinary practices, and we need plurality as a sort of way of looking. I mean, this has to do with the let's say, nature of territory itself. If urbanism has become territorial, we are in a different field. Andrei Corbo, for instance, speaks about territory as being a palimpsest and also being a polysemic concept, territory as a kind of a ultimate collective creation, right? A polyphonic, polysemic space. So we need different views, different knowledges. We need to cross them to bring them together if we want to address territory. And there is also, I think, a certain necessity to kind of recapture perhaps territory from the fields of I think, engineering and a kind of administrative tools through which it is being managed. I think we need design at territorial scale because we need to insist on the kind of social and cultural dimensions of territory. If I speak about the kind of technocratic management of territory, of course I speak as somebody who is based in Switzerland, but I think it's probably shared also, or certainly in Europe. And I think architects are able, let's say, to synthesize through design, let's say, the kind of complexity that arises by bringing different positions together. I have here assembled a couple of examples from, artist practices from Buckminster Fuller to Bruno Latour and his collaborators representing the Anthropocene, so how to think between the local and the planetary. Also Ursula Biemann already mentioned, and I have clearly seen coming to LINA that authors, 210 in total, you provided the statistics, are joining from 14 different fields: architecture, urban planning, design, filmmaking, ecology, journalism, many others. So this is really fantastic. And I was really, I thought it was really exciting to see how diverse those practices are. Then further, I would like to offer this idea of design as soft power. Maybe it's not the best definition, but so let's say soft power is a term used in political theory to describe a form of power that is non-coercive and whose main currencies are culture, political values, policy agendas. So in other words, I think we are perhaps in LINA, but also, let's say, DTH and other institutions somehow, I think we are in a position to prepare that role of a designer who works at the intersection of governance, public sphere, helping perhaps create or build awareness, influence the public debate, inform processes of social mobilizing, incite activist work, be part of it. No? So inform and innovate in context of governance and of the legal sphere, no? through which the production of space is managed or defined. So I think we are in a position to create a particular context, certainly a kind of a design without a client. We can be experimental, and in that sense we can experiment with different forms of organizing. I have also experienced in my own work at the university that kind of coalitions with the media are crucial. I have turned fully to open source work that goes very much against the grain of, you know, the academic publishing, which was seized by the kind of journals and KPIs and so on for a very long time. We have, I have to say, you know, dispensed with that at ETH, and we kind of insist on an open source ethos and share the work as soon as it's available. So in that, let's say, trajectory, I have highlighted Lucius Burkhardt, forensic architecture, and other sort of investigative efforts. For instance, the recent Pulitzer Prize awarded to female architects the first time, I believe, Alison Killing, for uncovering work of for uncovering the work camps for Uyghur Muslims in China, a kind of fascinating work of research of many thousands of satellite photographs, and then that were cross-referenced with eyewitness accounts. So I think in that sense, I see, let's say, such spirit in many of the LINA submissions, collectives working across borders, that creating frameworks for action that engage with the actual culture of design, that work with communities, that promote activism, and so on. Then I want to return once again to this notion of architecture and urbanism beyond the city, so being territorial. In my practice, I experienced that this change, this sort of leap to a different scale and scale of interactions and complexities is not easy. It is sort of involves a huge, let's say, act of repair. That we are talking about decentering and broadening, not only from the kind of city-centric perspectives, let's say, or that may be tinted in that way, city-centric, urban bias, and so on. But we also in that are addressing, you know, the sort of anthropocentric frameworks, and we are also addressing the kind of north-south asymmetries and so on. So this is a sort of a huge leap, and I think we need to really work collaboratively and build sort of a different kinds of almost let's say, ways of exchanging knowledge and experiences. I can also say that this kind of working beyond the city has emphasized various, let's say, the so-called peripheries, but also working at metropolitan scales, at regional scales, as opposed to the city scales. And it has brought different kinds of programs that are traditionally, let's say, non-architectural. So we have been working recently with agriculture. We have been working with nature conservation. So completely new fields, let's say, entering the the sphere of the knowledge of the architect. And in that sense, I would perhaps note that there are opportunities here for LINA and the fellows in the future. So let's say by its very design, LINA is oriented to the countries of European Union and the partner countries. I think it would be beneficial if this framework could be opened, because precisely that sort of north-south question could come into the foreground, and I think it's crucial because we risk to sort of perpetuate, we risk to sort of perpetuate the asymmetries. And also, I think I would also perhaps advise the focus on the spaces and territories of production. So city is a site of accumulation, a site of consumption. There is effort, there is an interesting project. Can a city, an interesting utopia, can a city be fully self-supporting? What would it look like if a city produces its own food and so on? And the authors recognize it's a utopia, but it's an interesting idea, that has been circulating. Cities are the problem and they are also the answer. But I would really insist, actually, they are not the answer. We have to capture the sort of totality. We have to capture the center-periphery relations. We have to be in the hinterland. We have to be, let's say, at the sort of remote corners of the planet, remote from our site, in order to capture the kind of a full complexity and implications. So I would encourage the somehow effort to broaden that geography. And finally, sorry, I have spoken the whole time without changing the slide. This is what happens when you work with two computers. But okay, that was the point. The regional scale, let's say the sites of production, the kind of territorial beyond the city, right? Breaking the kind of urban-rural divide. Let's say also the kind of anthropocentric opening the anthropocentric frameworks, also the north-south divide. And finally, tying to the previous, reparative and regenerative design mindset. And here I would like to focus on this notion of the mindset. No? It's not so much the kind of skills that we should change. It's more the perspective, right? And it is if we remember that diagram of the crisis of the urban that Kolha spoke about in the work of Studio Basel. I mean, something is happening which I would describe as a change of mindset, right? The role, the public role of the architect in the, let's say, mid-20th century was to enable urbanization processes, to foster growth, right? To drive progress in cities and so on. And we have reached a point where we are at the brink of a paradigm shift, and we are understanding the mindset has to change. In other words, the public role will be of a designer, of urbanist architect, will be to address exactly the opposite, to address the damages wrought by those processes, and to find out how to, let's say, how to actually repair those damages. So this involves a range of new approaches, of different approaches, engaging with perhaps some of those values that we named, sufficiency, longevity, reappropriation, transition of habitats and ecologies, traversing disciplinary boundaries, and working across both the built and the unbuilt lands, right? So these are the kind of shifts that are epistemological, that will reflect in our tools, and that are starting with the change of perspective. And here I have selected a couple of illustrations. Those projects with a different mindset are let's say, they are emerging everywhere. They are the projects of the LINA Fellows. It is great to see that conversation going, let's say. I have highlighted those that I particularly find perhaps more challenging to deal with, no? The question of labor, the question of human labor, of migrant labor, the dependence on migrant labor in various contexts, no? From, let's say, Masdar city to, food production in Switzerland to, let's say the entire system is dependent on that sort of precariat, labor precariat. We do not have enough research around it. We do not address it fundamentally. The diversity, the repair, regeneration requires human work, no? Requires more work than we are currently able to put in. We have technology, right? But technology, interesting conversations within the kind of feminist critique of the digital fabrication and robotics are going on. Technology very often has a wrong mindset, no? A colleague of mine wrote a paper who is represented here, Lenora Ditzler, with the idea of supporting diverse agricultural cropping systems, no? How can we design a farming robot without a monocultural mindset? Do we really need those big tractors that produce these homogeneous fields, or do we need another kind of technology that can create diversity, right? So the change of mindset brings kind of incredible big questions suddenly to the table, because we need different technologies, right? So there is a serious area of exploration there. And I also highlighted the area of rights, no? So that's about perhaps changing laws, changing rules of the game, and to do that, we need to, again, explore the mindset, no? How can nature have rights, but also can housing become human rights once again? What are the kind of legal frameworks, policy frameworks through which we can recapture those rights? So this is here an interesting example of socialization of a large part of building stock in Berlin, based on what the activists call the critical legal engineering, right? So the Article 15 enabled the kind of possibility to socialize a part of the housing stock. So I have seen, again, let's say, that spirit in LINA's projects, and I hope that I have inspired a little bit the next round or the continuation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Milica. Is there some quick question or comment? Oh, Boštjan Vuga, here you go.
Thank you, Milica, for very interesting lecture. I have actually one question which also addresses, the presentation you gave before, and it's a rather challenging question. So, what could be an alternative to repair? So, why I'm asking that, because I'm kind of like triggered with this sort of idea or concept of incompleteness or unfinishedness. You know, something which is kind of as a, I would kind of address it as a design methodology, you know, so that you, as an architect, design a object which has never been, which is not completed, which kind of question, which then put under question also, you know, you know, what is the issue of authorship and, you know, constant continuity, but also, you know, question of repair, you know, because if something is not completed, then maybe it doesn't need to be repaired, you know, but it's kind of a continuous evolvement of the process. It's more like a comment then.
I made it. So we can discuss it. I would say the kind of reparative mindset includes the unfinished. No, that's precisely, you know, somehow the statement. Again, it's not about perpetual newness. It's not about the kind of endless cycle of commodities and so on. It's about something that can grow, that has, that has a different life and trajectory and so on. That is open-ended. I would say this is consistent somehow with that, or we are trying to create a framework where it would fit. I mean, in this question about alternatives, right? So I think it's very hard, and we are sometimes, you know, we are asked as architects also to address that kind of future sight, right? So there is a certain kind of future to be imagined. There is our futurity is, let's say, in 2050, and it will be decarbonized and so on. And how should that look, no? And also what can be the scenarios through which we approach that future, right? So, and we are asked to present these scenarios, right? And I think that this is a very, very challenging exercise, no? The kind of 2050 exercise. And I have, we were in a different project on Geneva in conversation around these questions, and there is an interesting, in fact, a chart which I perhaps could have included in the presentation that was proposed by David Holmgren, one of the pioneers of permaculture. And he says, okay, here are the possibilities. We have a climate crisis and we have resource depletion. And these processes are happening at a certain speed. And they might unfold unevenly across the planet, and they will, right? So what will happen is that if we are, we can have the business as usual. So let's say the sort of the frame of the processes will not force us to change, for instance, the practices around fossil fuels. No, we can have such rapid change that everything will collapse, no? The social system, state, and so on. We will have maybe a chance at a different scenario for the kind of techno-fix future. We will engineer, as we said, we will fix, you know, the system to run in a kind of a green scenario, right? And then we have what he calls earth stewardship, right? And earth stewardship means that somehow through, let's say, care, repair, it involves a certain return to the locality, but also a different idea of joining labor and resources, let's say, to address that, right? And I think this is the conversation. What kind of options really we have, and which ones of those are worth designing, you know, and also which ones of those are we likely to find ourselves in, and, you know, how can we operate in those contexts and so on. I mean, we have chosen, I would say, in Holmgren's terms, earth stewardship as the option that is interesting to address, you know, architecturally or in terms of design. Green tech is not really in our hands. The brown tech is anyway business as usual, you know, and so on. So let's see, what kind of options do we have in that future casting somehow?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Milica, for your lecture. I would ask the audience to give an applause to our lecturer. Thank you. So we will go now to our last slot, the discussion. And I was asked by my team to kindly ask some of the audience who is sitting on the left side to come. Also, the first row is completely free if you'd like. There is time now. There are some seats here. Okay, so we are a bit, let's say, a bit late. So let's go on. So our last slot today is the discussion with the talk. With the title Visions and Revolutions in Architecture. And we will have two short presentations to introduce this discussion and then go to a more moderate discussion. So first I would like to the podium Professor Dr. Lučka Kajfež Bogataj. She will introduce the discussion with a short presentation with the title Planetary Boundaries and Architecture. So Lučka Kajfež Bogataj, welcome, is a professor of climatology at the University of Ljubljana. Her research is in the field of applied meteorology and climate change mitigation and adaptation. She was a member and report editor of the IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and she did receive a Nobel Prize for that in 2007. Welcome, and the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this kind introduction. I just hope okay. I will try not to be more than 10 minutes. I would like just to show you that climate change, which was mentioned many times already today, is not the only problem we are having. The concept I would like to show you is about more processes, more systems that are really at the moment pressed by humans, by our idea of eternal economic growth on the planet which does not grow. So the main problem is here. What is the problem? Problem is that some processes are irreversible. Climate change, for instance. Even more, the problematic is that we are not sure whether stability of the planet can last forever. We cross boundaries. So it's about boundaries. I enjoyed this presentation before me because there were no numbers. But believe me, architecture is also about, sustainable architecture is also about numbers. Why numbers? Because, you know, politicians many times say, oh, really, I did not know that things are going that way. Really, I'm surprised. Why did not you say that before? Okay, so let me start with these processes. So it's not just climate change. We have problems, ecological problems, which are many times also sociological problems, what lies behind. And it took many years that scientists sort of came up with this list. Some of these problems you are familiar with, ozone depletion, everybody heard about ozone holes. Everybody also heard about biodiversity loss, which is a huge problem for nature stability. Maybe you're not so familiar with nitrogen and phosphorus, but when you talk about food, about sustainable agriculture, which is connected with everyday's life, it's about nitrogen, believe me. Atmospheric aerosol loading, it's air quality in short. And air quality is something that for the last few days in Ljubljana, I hope you did not walk along a lot. The weather was nice, but air was horrible to breathe because of the suspended particles. You are also maybe not so familiar with ocean acidification, because CO2 is not just a problem in the atmosphere, it's also the problem in the sea. And food chain begins in the ocean, and if we broke the food chain because the oceans are getting more acid, it will impact our everyday life, believe me. Also on the planet which does not grow, water is limited, and global fresh water use is one of the problems. Land system change, how much of the land are we devoting to urbanism, to urban, or to the agriculture, for instance? And chemical pollution is everywhere. So science came up with the numbers. Okay, I will not bother you so much with the numbers. I just like you to know they are there. But I will comment, for instance, land system change, because it's very close connected to our urbanism. The indicator for that is not how big our cities are, but it's about how much land do we devote to agriculture. The upper limit, safe limit, is 15%. Already we are somewhere around 12%. So we are approaching that limit. Climate change indicator is CO2 concentration. Safe limit is below 350 ppm, but probably you're aware that we already have 420 or something like that. So we have numbers, but I would like to show you the state we are in. Back in Napoleon times, back when our great poet Prešeren lived, pre-industrial time, limits were far away. I can repeat you that, or can I? Look, in the middle, yellow, 1 billion people living modestly, so planet was huge. After the Second World War, problems begin to occur. We start to use oil, we start to use artificial, actually Haber-Bosch processes with fertilizers began to increase the yields. We did spend more and more land for agriculture. In 70s, we actually managed to cross the first line. So nitrogen flows, the circle of nitrogen is being broken for 50 years now with the consequences in nature. Eutrophication is a typical example. In 80s, we crossed the climate change limit, and in the last time, also biodiversity limit. So we are having this problem that we already crossed in 2015 3 limits. But in the last year, in 22, it was discovered that we actually also crossed the boundary of chemical pollution, because 200 substances are widespread in the environment, and also regarding not fresh water use, not water for drinking, but water that enables agriculture, so water in the soil. And all these problems, why I'm showing you more than climate change, is because these things are connected. And politicians sometimes just focus on one problem. For instance, climate change and focus of European Union few 10 years or more was biofuels. You remember biofuels that will keep climate change down, but to produce biofuels you need nitrogen, you need land, you need water, so you actually worsen 3 additional problems. So this is not a holistic solution. That's why deep down you have to understand that these things are connected. Okay, so I mentioned in January, it was this year, we exceeded environmental pollutants, including plastics, and in April, the 6th boundary was transgressed regarding water, so not a very pleasant situation. So how are countries doing? Because we are not in the same boat. If we look at European space or North Africa or North America, we are obviously transgressing more limits, practically all the limits. In India or in Africa, when people are having much different lifestyle, they are not yet transgressing all the boundaries, but their lifestyle is much different, and nobody probably wants to live there. So yeah, we have a problem. Slovenia, just because most of you probably coming from our country, how much are our boundaries transgressed? regarding climate change, it's 600%. So you can imagine what European Union is talking, or policy are talking, let's lower emissions by 50%, 55%. Oh, no, it's too much, let's do it 30%. It's about 600%. So this is cosmetics, what we are doing right now regarding climate change. The same problem we have with nitrogen, 500% ecological footprint. Actually, only water is something that in Slovenia we have quite a grip of. Some of you coming from Switzerland is the same in Switzerland. Water, okay, all the rest, unfortunately not. So how much is our architecture, or if I may say so, this branch contributing to climate change? A lot. So cities are actually outside contributors. About 70% of the problem regarding transportation, also energy production and so on. Also man-made materials are problematic. So yes, architecture and climate change go hand in hand. If you look at the nitrogen, which has nothing to do on the first side with architecture, it does. Sewage discharge, landscaping runoff, for instance, parks, lawns, gardens, we fertilize all that. So yes, we are releasing nitrogen into the environment. Also, fuel combustion releases nitrogen oxide. And of course, in the cities, people eat. Cities are sink for the agriculture. So yes, it's connected. Biodiversity, it's logical because urban sprawl fragments habitats. And whenever you build, you destroy some forms of life for sure. And some huge cities are really biodiversity hotspots. And also urban areas, they import plants, so they are also favorable for invasive species. So yes, again, connection. Land system change, of course. Water system degradation, also hugely connected with the cities. Concentrated urban water use is there. And also how we build cities, non-porous surfaces prevent groundwater to recharge. And in some countries, of course, also they steal water in the cities. Illegal wells are something that we don't find so much in Europe yet. Atmosphere loading, also connected, just to give you a hint that it has to do with you. It's not like this has nothing to do with me. So construction, demolition, for instance, they're quite atmosphere loading processes. And chemical pollution as well. Okay, so what is my message? My message is that designers, planners, and engineers are in a unique position to address this risk. So if you see yourself as a designer also, for sure you see yourself as a planner. Maybe you don't see yourself as a future engineers, but believe me, if you don't tackle this part of knowledge, I would say, if you don't gain this knowledge, then you will be easily probably some problems you will not actually address. This is my view. Of course, you are studying here. If you would be engineers, you'll be studying somewhere else at other faculties. But believe me, it's time for interdisciplinary thinking. So yes, you can help. You can help with climate change. There are lists of things you can do. But I would say be careful, because some of these actions, you should really have a lot of knowledge how to apply them. Otherwise, you will just do greenwashing, or you think you will have best intentions, but actually you will worsen climate change. For instance, I'm talking about some forms of green roofs or things like that. When it's too energy and water demanding, it's not actually regenerative action. So be careful. Be careful, have some engineering knowledge as well. And I will stop now, because there are a lot of solutions there. I would just like you to read this publication. It's online, so you can see what you can do actually. It was published last year. There are recipes there, so it's not just awareness raising, it's exactly what you as a future architect can do. So I will stop here and maybe I will run the...
Thank you. Yes, we will follow the discussion later on for some questions. Please write it down. We will ask Dr. Lučka, Kajfež, Bogataj later on. And we are moving forward to the presentation, again, a short one by Florian Hertweck. He will present, well, let's say a vision. Yeah, you have to convince us. So he will present the project Luxembourg in Transition, and then we will go to the discussion.
Okay, so I've been asked to reduce my presentation to 5 minutes, right? Vision, there's 5 minutes for visions left. And in Germany, you know, you say, if you have visions, you have to go to the doctor. But I try to speed up, so to gain some time. So it's a call for tenders launched by the Ministry for Energy and Spatial Planning in Luxembourg, and this was over 1 year and a half. And we were 4 teams at the last phase with MVRDV and AROP in 2001. And we were a team of 45 researchers, including engineers. And so the first phase was about metrics, and then translate the metrics into the territorial design. And then the last phase was about the transformation of a couple of case studies. So 45 researchers, planners, agronomes, engineers, economists, and so on. So Luxembourg Earth Overshoot Day was on February 14th. It's, as you know, the richest country, and the country, when it comes to boundaries, it's the country with the highest ecological footprint in Europe and the second in the world. And of course, we also had tornadoes and flooding every year and heat islands. So the effects of climate change are also very present in Luxembourg. And we did this investigation, and we had Patricia Espinosa recently in a colloquium, and she said we are probably heading towards the IPCC scenario, the RCP, the worst case scenario, and this is how Luxembourg will be in 2100, so plus 3 degrees. So the challenge is reducing the carbon footprint by 90%. And we always do a survey in the beginning of our presentation, and people believe it's 40, 50, maybe 60, but nobody really thinks that it's 90%. And we said, okay, let's maybe first look back, because it's Luxembourg in transition for 2050, becoming climate or carbon-free and resilient. And we said, okay, let's look back first 30 years, how Luxembourg was by then, by 1990, with 384,000 inhabitants and 35 cross-border commuters. And today, so it's, of course, there is this link between growth and the carbon footprint that we can maybe discuss later. Today it's 635,000 inhabitants and more than 200,000. So that was in the beginning of the call. At the end of the call, there are now 220,000 cross-border commuters. Of course, it's linked to the housing and the land question. And we said that technological progress, so the smart growth kind of, this is the official policy, you know, that will not avoid extending the built fabric, and we have to question somehow the growth model. So this conflict is present every day, and as Sébastien Marot said already 20 years ago, instead of extending our built fabric, we have to deepen the territories. I really like this notion of deepening the territories. So again, less is more, less waste, more reuse. And we said, so proceed to an urban repair, meaning by, if we accept a decent demographic growth, we have to absorb it somehow in what is there. Again, urban repair, so not sealing any more square meter of land, but trying to intensify what is there. It goes hand in hand, of course, with less feed, more food, as everywhere 75% of the agricultural land is used to produce feed and not food. So we have, as our minister says, we have the most performant cows in Luxembourg, and we know we have to reduce them from 70,000 to 20,000 in order to change also the agriculture towards an agroecological thing, and also our patterns of the unbuilt. So less top-down, more co-creation, you know. But I will now focus on this sufficiency on mobility, which I think is absolutely crucial. So of course, the e-mobility is not the solution. We also need it as a transition, but we need also fewer cars. And of course, you all know that this will bring us more quality of life. But most of all, and this is now my key aspect, is that this will offer us a tremendous reservoir of spaces and surfaces that we can develop. And we developed this idea through a couple of spatial typologies. The bold one we succeeded in dealing with, and now I'm just focused on the commercial zones. I think there's a huge reservoir for the upcoming years. So in Luxembourg, you know the kind of also scale of these commercial zones. You see here Luxembourg city center and just a few commercial zones in Luxembourg. There's one which is called Fürth. I also like the name Fürth. And we always say it's the mother of all commercial zones of Luxembourg, with 110,000 decorated sheds, as they used to call them, 60,000 cars every day, 55 tons CO2, and 6,200 parking spaces, and so on and so forth. I mean, you know these kinds of commercial zones, right? And I think this is super important after the conversion of industrial zones. It's up now to the commercial zones. And they are all incredible because of the sealed land heat islands. So I said 6,200 parking lots. So I can stop here. I mean, I could stop here, you know, it's not yet a vision. You can, because it's, 400 pages of report. It's super complex. We developed a kind of a charta and a kind of a guide, like an IKEA manual that you can have a look at, how to transform this relic of the 20th century in a sustainable site. I could stop here if you want. Or do you want another one? Okay. Let's go ahead. So I just want to show you a few plans, but it's not about design. It's not, you should not misunderstand this as a design project. It's a process, and I try to show it just in 2 minutes. So this is Fürth. There's no relationship. It's disastrous, the landscape around it. And first step is to try to get rid of the car of the site. So by, of course, these kinds of structures. I think the question before was interesting. I would call them ruins of adolescence, like Gilles de Lalex, you know, not ruins of obsolescence, but these kinds of ruins of adolescence in which you can concentrate the cars in a first step, link it, of course, to the public transportation system, and then working on qualitative public spaces. And this is maybe just one. I try to pick up one of these strategies. So what can we do with these parking lots, you know? And then, of course, try to urbanize the periphery and sealing this in between. I mean, it's not revolutionary as such, but I think it is absolutely necessary. And then developing pieces of it, and so on and so forth. So this is also, we try to integrate this politically, because we are now working for the next phase with the commune, with the government. There are no people actually living there, so the kind of bottom-up process is kind of complicated. But what is politically super difficult now to sell is to integrate the highway into the site, you know, saying this will become an urban avenue, and just to show you a few how to transition, you know, how it could look like later on. So, and that is part, of course, of a very complex, like, territorial project that you can have a look at in Luxembourg in transition.lu. Thank you very much. 10 minutes, right?
Okay, thank you, Florian. So we are in the final step of our today program. And I would like to now, the team is already working, so they will remove the speaker's corner and bring us some chair for the discussion. So I invite to the podium Matevž, Čelik, Milica Topalović, Florian Hertweck, and myself. And we will have a short discussion. Please join us. Thank you so much. Ta extra, yes. Okay, so the guests are over here, and we with Matevž over here. Okay, okay, good. Okay, so. Okay, so thank you very much again for your contributions, the visions, the problems, and we will have maybe a question of two from the side of Matevž and myself. Matevž, would you like to start, or?
I can do, yes. Thank you all for your contributions. I would like to ask Milica. You mentioned the crisis of disciplinary tools, and you were talking about the planning and the regional planning as we used to know in Yugoslavia, and then you were talking about how we need more territorial planning now, and could we say we just need more planning and more better planning projects?
I mean, I'm critical, or I think that there is a lot to be discussed in the planning field. I don't consider, I mean, even though I'm officially the professor for architecture and territorial planning, in fact, I do not participate at all in the kind of spatial planning in Switzerland. This is a field that is I think where we see engineers essentially, architects are not part of that conversation anymore, right? So this is a sphere managed through, let's say, regulation of a different kind. Architects are not part of that conversation. I think that it would be interesting, fascinating, and I think what I'm trying to develop with my students is a kind of vision where we say the city, the compact city, right, is not the right figure for our attention right now, no? That is a form which is, compact city is a kind of 19th century form, right? And the city has grown and, includes wide networks, commuter zones, the metropolitan region of Zurich. We do these exercises where we map, or we sort of theorize and try also to elaborate through cartography and ethnography and so on, to understand what is the extent of the metropolitan region. It means what is the space in which the actual patterns of everyday life are, to say so, organized in such a way that people interact, that they move between places, that they go from the center to the periphery and so on, right? So this is the figure that is confirmed in a kind of everyday practice, no? And that figure extends across the entire canton of Zurich, no? And beyond, right? So the planning boundaries, the administrative boundaries do not correspond with the actual urban reality, right? So the planning in some let's say, village, 20 kilometers of Zurich, is completely detached from the planning for the city of Zurich, even though, 80 or 90% of commuters travel every day back and forth, even though the food for Zurich is produced, and so on and so on. So let's say we do not have currently the right tools to address. And I think that work on this regional dimension would, if we could unlock those opportunities, politically, administratively, right? We could really create, I would say, I think the word is resilience, right? We could work on the resources, we could work to protect the water, we could work to rewire agriculture, make the system more local. We could work on the questions of access to housing, on the kind of housing equity, and so on. So,
Want to continue?
Yes, I wanted to ask you all a question, also in this context of let's act, let's do something. So if we hear a lot about projects and proposals who might be actually, at the end, a greenwashing project. So what I wanted to ask you for the audience, also for us, so could you maybe name 1 or 3 things in architecture, or also broadly in urbanism, which is actually a clear case of greenwashing, but is actually, of course, saying, oh no, we are sustainable, we are environmental friendly practice. Could you find some case, maybe? All the 3 of you?
Yes, there are a lot of examples. I think that architecture is swamped in the greenwashing in many, but maybe we should use some examples not from Europe. For instance, they're building one airport now in India, the greenest airport, and I mean, it's like it reminds me of this green growth theory, that Europe or world will be saved by green growth. I mean, airport cannot be something that is green by definition, I guess. Or maybe what I'm allergic a bit is also all this greenery on the buildings like Bosco Verticale in Milan. It looks nice, but from energy point of view, if you calculate the kilowatt hours and the water and the people who must climb, the climbers to cut this, I mean, this is nice, it is beautiful. But it's not green, it's not sustainable, for instance. This is, or there are many more, I guess.
I have to tell you a little anecdote here. So Stefano Boeri was guest in our lecture program, right? And we spoke with him, and Ann Lacaton was also on the same panel, and it was a nice conversation. And then the question came inevitably, is Bosco Verticale greenwashing, right? And he was very upset, and he said, it's not all about the kind of carbon calculation. He said symbolic level is also important, right? So I think it's not without the kind of essence, right? I think he has a point there. I'm not sure whether, we can continue the discussion, right? But it's important that certain messages are disseminated, that they are made public, It's a question how certain ideas enter the public discourse, right? And can we be part of that as well? Maybe we don't have to build such luxury buildings just to disseminate ideas, but that's an interesting part.
I'm always laughing when I see somehow projects that claim to be, whether it's just a building or district climate neutral. I mean, what is meant, and this is indeed now foreseen, I think, in the Luxembourgish legislation, I think from next year on, it refers maybe, in the best case, to the phases of the use of the building. So with renewable energies and so on and so forth. But of course, nothing is climate neutral today in the production of space. And therefore, I think the idea also of the great repair is if you see, take all the gray energy that is embedded in the existing buildings, you know, and we know that buildings that have been realized since the 80s, 90s, you have to wait roughly about 40 years that the gray energy is equal to the energy that is used after 40 years. So that's what we are talking about, right? It's not and then the longevity of the building is in Luxembourg is, I think it's 30 or 35 years, right? So we are talking about the use maybe, but that's just one part. And then let's also talk about the last cycle. So therefore, recycling also needs energy, you know? And you can't recycle, by the way, everything. So this is there when you see carbon neutral building, it's bullshit.
Just to add, maybe the best example of greenwashing is like electric car is carbon neutral. I mean, emissions from electric car are totally equal to one small car, classical. So it's complete lie. But people buy it. But they are good for air pollution, yeah. That's the only.
So if Mateja asked what could be greenwashing, then I ask vice versa. Is there a practice that you know that is good and should be an inspiration and we should stick to it in relation to the future of the planet?
I mean, it wouldn't make sense to name now just one project, but I think referring to your first question, you know, when it comes to planning culture, I mean, we can, of course, question what does it mean planning, but I think our condition, I mean, our situation becomes more and more urgent. You know, the gap, what you call the ambition gap is growing, is getting bigger and bigger. You know, between the curve, you know, when you see what needs to be done in order to fulfill the Paris Agreement, what is indeed implemented and the ambition. So the gap is getting bigger, and also the conflict, which is kind of a fatal situation, the conflict between the technological discourse and what we call the sufficiency is also going, which in the beginning was conceived complementary, is now becoming a struggle. So we think that we need now very important measures. So we can discuss it, and they are in the discourse, you know, moratorium on new buildings, moratorium on demolition, no more land take. We can discuss whether it's no more net land take, no more gross land take. But the European Union foresees this for 2050. Come on, shall we wait until 2050? This is stupid. So we have to act now, and the questions are, I think, the planning culture has to change tremendously. You know, it's not maybe changing a little bit here and there. But that is now in the discourse, you
know. My name is Mika. I'm an architect. Okay, I'm talking. I can only see a very gloom future, actually, from what you are saying. I can see really this kind of post-apocalyptic situation here, because by 2050, we'll be 10 billion. We're just too many, right? And we have to talk about degrowth, not building anymore, lowering the production of, I don't know, cows, for example, changing the whole agricultural system, changing the whole building production, industrial production, all of that. I don't see it as a very bright future. I'm sorry, because I see it as a We'll have to go back to manual labor, meaning some more in slavery of people, maybe energy will be very expensive. I don't see it as a very democratic and nice and human place.
But we are architects. I mean, that is maybe our duty to, you know, show how a degrowth future can be positive, you know, how an alternative life that fulfills, you know, the measures that can be extremely interesting and rich. You know, I think this is our duty as architects, you know, to show how this other life would be, you know, in a degrowth or in this kind of condition.
No, I mean, I fully agree that those threats are embedded, right? And I think that if we, I mean, it's, we discussed those scenarios, I think it's impossible to be realistic and predict what will happen. I think we are probably, we won't see probably the kind of, you know, we will see a kind of uneven unfolding of various types of, you know, adaptations and solutions across the world, right? And I think the question is ultimately, you know, perhaps we can, you know, I mean, certainly we want to make the effort. We have no other choice, right? But I think ultimately, you know, we might see a kind of a fragmentation, you know, a kind of a let's say deglobalization happening into a very, very fragmented world, right? And I think we are certainly in I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's a discussion you know, what kind of, what is the effective form of politics, right? Should we resort to activism? Should we resort to certain kind of let's say disruptive actions and so on? It is unclear. I mean, I have also spoke with other people about, you know, I think these are also the questions on the table. There are people like Andreas Malm who say, you know, we have to you know, we have to stop, you know, certain, you know, we have to sort of be you know, working against the fossil industry and so on, right? We're very directly, we cannot be polite anymore, right? So in a way, it's a question also of tools, and I think yeah, let's see what happens. I mean, I think it's still a very exciting to work with students, right? And I think that conversation is interesting. They are different. They are more political, you know. If I look at the last 10 years at ETH, it's a completely different generation, right? So it's also in their hands, right?
Can I just ask a question? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Is it okay?
No, I don't think that future is so gloomy, but we have to take action. And action, I guess you have two sides of the action. One is, I call it sociology. So it doesn't have to be 10 billions. You know, you look at Europe, you could look at North America. We have 2 little children. So it's about empowerment of women. It's about, you know, things that stop. No, but it's about 10 children I'm talking about. So, and also the lifestyle. So as long as we will have GDP as a measure and GDP growth as a measure of success, then we are doomed. And there's technology, and technology is new kinds of energy. It can be done, but if you compare the investments in new sources of energy to investments in still fossil fuel, it's funny. You know, for instance, Europe in some technologies, I will not mention it, it will come out as a promotion, inputs only as much money as it is spent in 5 minutes when you look at the cars on the road. But this technology could solve the problems, maybe. So yeah, it's technology and it's sociology, and we are failing on sociology. We are failing on economic models. Model of growth on planet that doesn't grow, it's finished.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. I'm not sure if I have a question or just a general comment, but it seems, one, the conversation is super grim, that the future is pretty bleak. And also that, I don't know, as architects, if we take too much responsibility on our shoulders to sort of solve these issues. But I think the comment that I would make is that perhaps things aren't so complicated or to solve these kind of issues, because for 6,000, 10,000, 15,000, 80,000 years of our history, we were actually sustainable, you know, and kind of did things in quite sustainable ways up until quite recently. Let's say the 19th century or 18th century, we were sort of not so bad. I can give the example in Ireland in 1850, there was 8 million people, and they were sustained in quite kind of rudimentary sort of systems. The population of Ireland today is around 6 million, and never really recovered from this famine that it occurred. But at that time in history, it was able to sustain a population of 8 million based on the way that we're using resources or building homes or whatever. The other thing I wanted to add was that as architects, we make drawings of buildings, but we don't actually make buildings. People or builders make buildings and they know how best to do it. But since the sort of First World War, let's say, we lost a lot of craft that actually is involved in making buildings, whether it's timber or with rammed earth or these types of things. And we've moved toward a much more industrialized way of actually making buildings themselves. But I think the comment that I really wanted to get at was that the way that we make buildings today is quite problematic, you know, and we've actually lost all of the knowledge and the skill that is involved in the craft of making a building from more noble sort of resources. I didn't hear it really talked about today, so that's kind of why I wanted to bring up it as a comment, and that perhaps the solutions aren't that far away from us in so much as we just have to sort of go back to what we did for thousands of years. If you take the Great Wall of China, for example, it's a rammed earth construction, but it still sits for many thousands of years. I don't know if who wants to take this up, or, I mean, I think I would add to it that it's really a problem of education and having the people there to actually do these things. Working in a project where we're trying to implement some of these ideas of crafts, it is extremely difficult to find people to actually build in these types of ways, because those sort of systems of construction just don't really exist anymore.
Yeah, very good point. I just want to say William Morris was there, if you remember, for the craft. I mean, it's absolutely an important idea. We have to relearn, right? So we have to bring the craft. I mean, this is about plurality, right? The knowledge of the builder, of the craftsman. Can we bring that into the School of Architecture, which is based around training the architect how to manage the sort of industrial building process, right? With the industrially delivered materials, right? So totally disconnected from the local resources, etc., etc. The architect today is generally not educated to work with, for instance, wood which grows on a site. He just cannot build a house with the actual wood. He can only build with sort of, you know, prefabricated wooden products, you know. We have to bring it back in the School of Architecture. We are trying, right? So there are, you know, studios that are busy with that and so on. So it is, I mean, on a more general note, I would just say, it's interesting, Mika, in a way, on this sort of, if we look at, you know, maybe 2050, we are worried what will happen, right? But the actual work which is being done is incredibly rich, right? It is truly exciting what is happening in the school, right? So in a way, I hope we can, you know, we can make in a way, you know, contribute to a meaningful change, no?
Another comment or question?
I have two comments. I hear a lot of the times that that the generation that comes after us has to change something. I think we all have to change something. And I don't think we should put all the pressure on the young generation, but we should start thinking about all the changes we can do in small ways today. And the second thing is, I don't think any one of us wants to live in 1850 and work in the way 1850 was worked, because I don't think anyone would be sitting here in this auditorium. And I think... That's not the point I was making. Okay, sorry. But it sounded a bit like going back to those agricultural workings on the field. So I think we need to see how we can kind of combine that with the knowledge that we have today, and see how we can really change the way we think every second, the way we do conferences, the way we do events, the way we do housing, the way we do everything. And I think all of us together, from politics to students to all of us sitting here, I think that's just my point from listening.
Yeah, I like that comment a lot. And maybe the magic word that we are missing, I did not hear so much today, is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Because what makes me optimism is that we grow enough food, but we waste half of food. We have cars which are parked 92% of the time. So we have tremendous reserves. Also buildings that are empty. We have this lack of flats for students, but actually half of Ljubljana old buildings are empty because, you know, so there are reserves everywhere, but we need to somehow to make this work, not without many new investments. You probably have to change how things are governed more than, so it's not just, but just one comment. You mentioned that you are architects and you are not supposed to deal with something. Everybody has to deal. It doesn't matter, are you a military architect, I don't know, preacher or a teacher. It's emergency situation. It does not resolve anybody from action.
Thank you. I think we can finish here today.
Oh, there are many questions. Look.
No,
Andreas Ruby wants to
more questions.
For 3 hours now. But I would say that efficiency is certainly not enough, because that is the official political discourse, you know. Therefore, we say we need also sufficiency, you know. We don't only need to be more efficient, but we also need to be sufficient. But I like I mean, of course, the Great Repair Project is not retrospective. I think this is extremely important. And what you said is I totally agree, especially by knowing that 2/3 of the population, global population, is living in tropical conditions, and that the free cooling is, I mean, more technology means also more obsolescence, means more, you know, and that the free cooling kind of is not a question of technology. Will be a disaster. And I agree with what you said, but at the same time, I think Milica was very clear that it's beyond also the architectural object. I mean, we can talk about crafts and about the architectural objects. The question is different, I think, in the global south and in the global north. The question in our sphere is whether we need new buildings. Do we need more new buildings? This is a little bit the question. And then I think it becomes more complicated, because then we have to tackle the question of ownership. And this is then super political and not so easy.
I think I just want to add that I think it was just the point I was really trying to get at is that we've lost something in the 20th century. You know, we literally have lost something in the sense that we have made something so simple, so basic. A concrete wall can be done by 2 people on a piece of formwork, but if you want to go a little bit further than that, then you need a 10-year training and all of this stuff otherwise involved. And there's really a history behind that as to how the hell we've ended up here, you know. And the reason I referenced the 19th century was not to go back and live there, but to say that if you look back over history, we have been able to construct in a way that was in a balance with the environment. I chose one country in particular just to say that there was a lot of people living there in some sort of equilibrium with its own environment, you know. That's the only point I was making.
I mean, I would like to say that just to underline this, it's not about going back. We can never go back. This is just not possible, right? But it is about reconsidering reconsidering certain approaches. You know, urban civilization is essentially the civilization of kind of non-manual workers. This is our aspiration, no? Don't you think there is a space to reinvent something there? Not as a way of oppression, right? It is about the pleasure of craft, right? You know, it is also, I mean, you know, in the School of Architecture, it is not, we don't offer that knowledge of crafting an object with locally found materials. We haven't done that for a very long time. There is a space to bring it back, you know, without saying how, what will be the sort of biopolitical, project emerging out of it, right? I think the agricultural system is deeply damaging, and our civilization is built on top of that. It is absolutely, the idea of it has any kind of empathy toward, the rest of the living world has been lost, right? I mean, this is, I doubt that there is not a space to reinvent something there, right? We cannot continue like that, right? So in a way, it's really about new ideas, right? And I think the discussion clearly also involves technology, right? But the idea to work differently with technology, to create different technologies that can enable meaningful work, that can support craft, that can support work in agriculture that leads to diversity, that can, we need different tools, right? So I think there is a kind of really interesting space to reinvent. Also, I think the idea that the whole, humanity should live in cities, right? I mean, we are all deeply sort of soaked in that idea. I mean, why not reinvent a village as a beautiful site of life? Why not, right? I mean, there is a space to work on that.
Thank you. I really appreciate this eagerness for discussion. But I suggest we continue it in a room, in the next room, because the conference continues after 1 hour. Before you all leave this room, I would like to thank to all the speakers today and to all the guests for their contributions. And please, there will be a QR code on the screen on the top. Scan it and fill in a short survey that we need. It will only take you a minute of your time. After 1 hour, a conference starts celebrating Plečnik 150, and you are all invited to stay, to listen to 4 more lectures that start at 5 p.m. And we are looking to see you all tomorrow on the second day of the conference, when we will hear the presentations of the 25 selected emerging applicants who replied to our call for projects. They come from, they will be part of the program that is created by 27 members in 22 countries around Europe. They are all here, and let's give them a short applause for preparing the first LINA annual program. So we start tomorrow at 10 a.m. and with this I conclude the first day of the conference. See you tomorrow. And I kindly ask all LINA fellows to stay in the room because we need to share an information with you as well.